Hello and welcome. You're watching Tech 24. I'm Julia Seeger. Coming up in this week's edition, experts agree the 2016 U.S. presidential election is the most technologically advanced election in history, with Republicans using viral social media to push more people to vote, and Democrats methodically focusing on targeted voting softwares. In this edition, we take a look at how technology is reshaping the world of politics and campaigning. But first, President Barack Obama has earned the title of social media president. It started in 2008 when his campaign built an online juggernaut. With 13 million emails, nearly 4 million donors, 2 million members of the MyBarackObama.com social network, and tens of thousands of engaged activists, Obama's team broke new grounds in using the internet to build a new kind of powerful political machine. And beyond his campaign, Obama is also considered to be the most tech-savvy president to date, as Martin Pollard explains.
He is a tease in a high-tech world, probably more so than any US president ever. His official account on Twitter has nearly 80 million followers, and it's widely agreed that using technology to connect with young voters helped him win 2 presidential elections.
He used social media to boost his image and come across as modern. Without social networks, that wouldn't have been possible.
The US president is a fan of all kinds of gadgets. He's been seen this year wearing a Fitbit bracelet which can track his steps, heart rate, calories burned and more. Earlier this month, he visited the University of Pittsburgh to see a mind-controlled robotic arm. It was created for Nathan Copeland, who was left paralyzed after a car crash 10 years earlier.
Nathan is moving this hand with his brain. These are his own signals that he's sending out that are manipulating with, pretty amazing precision.
Even more out of this world was this exchange in 2010 when the president spoke to astronauts at the International Space Station.
Hello, Mr. President. You're talking to the Increment 28 crew and the crew of the Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Oh, that's funny, see, because I was just dialing out for pizza.
The US president congratulated the team on their work and on taking human endeavors to the stars.
And it's time to welcome our in-house expert, Dhananjay Khatalkar. Hello and welcome, Dan.
Hello, Julia.
Tell us more about Obama's tech legacy.
Well, there are 2 sectors where Obama's tech legacy can be felt. One of them is the clean energy sector. In 2016, more energy has been generated in the US using solar power than it was from 2006 to 2012. So that's a big step. It has also reduced the carbon footprint in recent years. So 2016 is going to be one of the cleanest years for the last quarter century or so. And more importantly, the energy department under the Obama administration has given away loans for large power facilities and for innovative technologies in order to reduce the carbon footprint. And among these beneficiaries are Tesla and Ford. So they have now, they are at the forefront of creating electric vehicles. And that goes along well with Obama administration's objective of high fuel efficiency standard. So this is one of the sectors. And if you want to proceed further, then there is also space exploration as well.
Right. We saw him earlier in the report talking to astronauts in space. He's a fervent advocate of space exploration.
That's right. Mars is one of his objectives. In fact, in 2010, he had stated that by the decade of 2030, NASA should be able to send a manned mission to Mars and bring them back safely to Earth. Only a few months ago, he reiterated this objective. And in between, NASA has selected 6 companies to develop prototypes and concepts for deep space habitats. Now, in recent years, we have also seen the major steps taken by private space company SpaceX, whether it comes to designing new rockets, which they are now using to send to International Space Station. And maybe Obama's dream of sending men to Mars by 2030 could become a reality.
We do hope so. We're going to turn now our attention to the 2016 presidential campaign. Citizens are increasingly using social media as the primary source of information they receive on politics and political candidates. And campaigns have realized this and have considerably made new investments in social media strategies. Well, for more on this, let's welcome Dr. Daniel Kreis, Associate Professor of Political Communication at the University of North Carolina. Thanks for joining us, sir.
It's great to be here.
How is the upcoming presidential campaign different from the previous ones?
Well, I think we see a couple things. I mean, first of all, there's just increasing use of social media platforms and changing demographics that come with that increasing use. Facebook went in 2008 from being primarily a platform used by younger voters now to Facebook being used primarily among 45 to 65-year-old adults to have political conversations. So different platforms have changing demographics. I think technology is increasingly much more the backdrop with which we conduct much of our social lives. And then the other thing that we continually see is the rise of new platforms. So if you look at the 2008 election, Facebook was really a key driver of that election. Twitter was in its infancy at that stage. 4 years later, Twitter was at the center of the political universe in terms of a key way that candidates were trying to connect with journalists and shape media narratives around their campaigns. And then fast forward to this cycle, and we have entirely new platforms like Snapchat that, at least in the United States, reach upwards of 46% of millennials. Of them, significant majorities are engaged voters and using these technologies to engage politically. So one of the things that we've seen is campaigns and candidates having to continually adopt to this, the new technological context within which they're running their candidates. So that's one really big new thing. I think the other thing that we've seen during this cycle is Senator Clinton's campaign really investing significantly to produce really rich content for social media. And to get really rich video content out there, social media content out there, in order to connect with voters. And then, of course, the Donald Trump campaign has brilliantly used Twitter in order to influence the frames and agendas of the professional press, and has very much sort of shaped how journalists have been covering this election more broadly, in addition to mobilizing armies on Twitter to go out and spread Donald Trump's message.
And now, what's the role of data in these elections?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about politics over the last 20 years is that campaigns face an increasing challenge to try to just even gain the attention of voters. With significant audience fragmentation, given the rise of hundreds of television channels, hundreds of different websites, platforms for social media, et cetera, it's a lot harder for candidates to get their message in front of voters, to try to engage them and make them care. So one of the things that campaigns have done is invest much more money in data to try to figure out which voters should they be making appeals to, what's the best way in order to reach them, and when they do reach them, what should they say more broadly? So to that end, in the United States, parties have invested in large databases that have hundreds of data points on every member of the electorate. And one of the things that parties and campaigns do is take that data set and try to figure out which citizens are likely to be supporting me, which citizens are likely to be supporting my opponent, which citizens are open to persuasion, which citizens are likely to vote, and how can I appeal to them to get them to come on over to my side or to turn out on election day.
Well, thank you so much, sir. That was Dr. Daniel Kreis, Associate Professor of the University of North Carolina. And now, Dan, from bubbling in to all electronic devices, Americans still have lots of different technologies to vote.
That's right. The most popular among them is, of course, ballot scanning, in which you have a ballot and you mark a specified area. Then after that, this ballot is then scanned using either optical equipment or digital scanner. And the big advantage of this ballot scanning is that you still retain the ballot. So if there's a need for an audit, then that can be done pretty easily. Now, the second technology, which is slightly more advanced, is the electronic voting machine. So this machine is activated by a blank piece of paper. Once you insert that paper, you get a choice of candidates on the screen. You choose your candidate and press the print button, after which you get a printout. So you can review your selection, you can verify it. And if you're satisfied, you can then reinsert the paper, and the machine then uses the barcode to scan and starts counting your vote. Now, there were some fears that these machines could be hacked, but one of the anti-hacking measures, you could say, is that this machine is not connected to any network, nor does it save the ballots on its own hard drive. So there's a separate USB drive, which is again encrypted. And so there are a lot of safeguards taken against hacking.
Now, these two technologies aren't quite cutting edge, but there are new ways, more high-tech ways of voting now with online voting.
Yes, online voting is one of the ways, but very few states are using online voting in the US. I think the primary reason being that, as Alaska says, that online voter, they waive their right to a secret ballot. So that could be a bit scary that your ballot is not secret anymore.
Thank you, Dan. And in light of Donald Trump's claims of election fraud, and with the memory of the disputed presidential election of 2000 still looming, all this technology could be under more scrutiny than ever in this year's presidential election. Well, earlier I spoke to Coney McCormack, an international election administration expert who's just published a report, Democracy Rebooted, The Future of Technology in Elections, with the Atlantic Council. She says the U.S. urgently needs to update voting technology. Here's why.
The generational divide is the main problem. You've got young people who are so used to doing everything online and with their smartphones. And it's just such a disconnect with them to have to think about, well, what's this paper and how do I go wait in line somewhere? And it's becoming more and more obvious that as the younger voters get older, they're not going to accept this type of voting. And online voting has been successfully implemented in 13 countries, and especially in Estonia, where for the last decade, and now 30% of the voters are choosing to vote this way. So what people are starting to say, well, why can't we do it? Well, actually, the U.S. has, because we have such a decentralized system, done some experiments with online voting in 4 different states, most recently in Utah in March in the Republican caucus, where 14% of the voters chose to vote online. And that was a very successful project for those voters. 45 countries, some of those voters lived in and were able to vote online. I think it's going to hopefully promote more pilot projects so that the technology can be reviewed. And also the improvements in the blockchain technology, which is what's used in the Bitcoin, is really potentially could be a huge movement in this direction to get the security that would be necessary to allow more pilot projects.
Well, that's it from us here at Tech 24. We hope you enjoyed the show, and do stay tuned to France 24.